Welcome back to the Life with Nick podcast. I'm your host, Nick Kleitch, and with me today is a gentleman who is a former teacher of mine who I've kind of reconnected with through some networking, and we got a lot of good stuff that we're going to be talking about today. So, Scott Litterer, thank you for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure, Nick. It's exciting to be here. Happy to be here to talk with you again today.
Yeah, so just for the listeners' fun sake, we had a little bit of technological errors to get to this point, but we are going to be talking about mindset and a lot of that type of information. So we tried to use that here when we were dealing with our technical difficulties, and we're up and rolling now. So thank you again for being here. So I think just as a really easy place to start, Scott, if you want to just mention, you're in retirement now, you're working with a couple of organizations. So let's just get the real baseline foundation laid and just mention some of the organizations that you've been working with.
So I work for a company called Z Winning Mindset, and the wrestling division is Wrestling Mindset. But I work with a lot of wrestlers, a lot of wrestling teams, but I also work with track teams, basketball teams, football teams, golf teams. So it's pretty diversified, but it's middle school, high school, and collegiate athletes. And so that's where I do a lot of my work. And then I also work with an organization called the John Maxwell Organization, where I'm a certified speaker, trainer, and coach. And I do a lot of that work with adults. So I also work a lot of mindset, leadership type coaching, speaking, training with people from all different walks of life.
Yeah, thank you. One thing I found fascinating about our reconnection, and I'll go into just a little bit of a story here and then come back to that point. So I had been kind of, figuring out maybe what I want to do with my life, that grand question. And so coaching has been something that I've become very newly aware of. There's a local firm here in Cedar Rapids that I was introduced to that does a great job. And then I had noticed you doing both of these things, and I have read quite a few personal development books, including some of Maxwell's work. And so we just reconnected on life coaching and lifestyle coaching. And so the fact that you're able to coach these young athletes all the way through being able to coach adults, I think it's a wonderful concept. And I think it's a concept that more people need to lean into. Essentially, what I would like to get into a little bit here before we get into really the meat and potatoes of mindset and some other things, I want you to talk on your why, because you were a teacher for a very long time. You're in retirement now. And you could kick your feet up and be drinking margaritas down in Mexico. But anyone who knows you probably knows that there's work to be done, and you like to stay active. So if you just want to touch on that a little bit, Scott, that'd be great on kind of your why for some of this coaching.
Well, and thanks for asking, because that's what gets me out of bed in the morning, right? My why. Yeah, I'm 57 years old. I'm a retired teacher, coach, instructional coach, working with professional development for teachers. And I think there's a couple different things I talk about when I talk about my why, but I have to talk about my faith for sure, because I really believe that I'm on this earth to love and serve and add value to other people. And I don't think there's a time when you should stop doing that, right? I don't think that just because you might retire from one particular career, one area of your life, doesn't mean you can't keep adding value to other people throughout your whole life. And it's kind of ironic that one of the people that really had a big impact on me was John Maxwell. I went to a conference called the Global Leadership Conference, and I heard John speak. And he talked about his grandson who was 5 years old and how he would hold the door open for people. As a 5-year-old, he was adding value to people. And then he talked about his 85-year-old dad who couldn't wait to get to the new nursing home. And he said, "Dad, why are you in the hurry to get to the new nursing home?" And he said, "Because there's going to be people there that need to be welcomed. There's going to be people there that are scared to go to this new home. I want to be there to welcome them." And so it's this idea that no matter how old you are, where you're at in your life, you can always serve people. And that's grounded in my faith.
Amen. Amen. And I think that obviously gives you something to still work towards, continue to learn, continue to refine, which obviously keeps that, just you more engaged overall. But I think there's this wonderful overall concept here of wisdom being passed down to younger folks. And that's kind of the story of our culture as a whole, is just this extension of people that have come before us and learning from their goods and their bads and what they accomplished and what they didn't accomplish. And so I just think it's cool that you view it in that light, and hopefully that encourages some listeners too, if they're nearing retirement or in retirement, that there's probably youngsters out there that are dying for your expertise. And if they're smart enough and you're smart enough to kind of set up a platform for that, I think that is something life coaching I've found to be very cool. One more thing on that before we get into maybe some other stuff. What has becoming a life coach, and obviously I'm going to stay on the adult side now because I know you just had a many year resume of coaching kids and teaching kids, but what has life coaching kind of taught you about yourself, or just about kind of the art of being able to do that to young professionals or even people that are your age?
Well, I just think, I think to really be truly happy in life, I really feel like you have to always be striving to be better. I think when we stop doing that, when we kind of get in a rut and we're just don't feel like we're making progress moving forward in our lives, that it's really hard to be happy. It's hard to be fulfilled. And so really helping people figure out how can we continue to move forward? How can we set goals? How can we just continue to use every day, right? We're only on this earth once. We never get a day more than one time. So how can we make sure we're using every day to the fullest potential?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's the motivation I think that you can instill in people. And one of my bigger takeaways from our prior conversation was that people get coaching in high school and college, and it becomes such an inspiring thing for them. And yet, for some reason, we lose this notion that we should be done being coached. And I don't know if you see that in your world at all.
Oh, definitely. I think, yeah, I don't know why it is. I think it's just part of our society that we don't realize that the things that our coaches helped us with when we were in middle school and high school and maybe college, those are things that the coaches help you get someplace that you maybe couldn't get to on your own, right? Or maybe get there quicker. And there's no reason that we should get out of high school or college and not keep striving to be our very best. And a coach can really help you get there more efficiently, quicker, and maybe even reach places that you would never get without a coach.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I love being stretched and having someone as an accountability partner at the very least, I think is something people should want to look into. And I have found there's just so many different life skills that I've learned in personal development that I would have maybe wish we would have discussed in more public education. But there again, I know that's a full can of worms as it is, and we won't spend too much time in the podcast about that. So switching gears just a little bit in terms of your why you're getting into these coaching practices. One thing that I think is super important to discuss is really just this idea of mindset, right? How often do we talk about mindset? How often do we understand it and unpack it? And you just do such a nice job of doing that through not only what you've been taught, but also just kind of continuous learning, I'm sure. So let's just kind of lay this question out here for you, Scott, of what does mindset kind of mean to you?
Well, when I think of mindset, I think of we call them at Z Winning Mindset. We talk about our mental muscles, and there's a bunch of different mental muscles. Just like if you go into the weight room, you can work your biceps, your triceps, your quads, your hands. Right? You've got physical muscles. We think of our mental muscles as things like motivation, or being able to relax under pressure, perform well under pressure, being able to be confident when you walk into a job interview, when you walk into a sporting competition, when you walk in to do a public speaking. So these types of things, motivation, mental toughness, motivation, confidence, those are what I think of when I think of mindset. And a lot of time, if you think about it, everything we do every day involves one of these things, whether it's staying motivated, whether it's keeping our attention, our focus on something, whether it's reacting well to a bad situation. No matter what we're doing all day, we all are using our mind and responding throughout our day. And so being able to respond well, to stay motivated, to relax and perform well under pressure, these are all things that we all should work on a continual basis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. To think we all have it figured out now is maybe not the right way to take a look at it. So Well, first off, thank you for laying that out. Secondly, there was something that I wanted to really drill into, and that concept is the cycle of thought to action to habit. And I really want to spend some time here because this is how we are neurologically wired in our biology. And I say that and I slow down to say that because this is critically important to just understanding yourself. And eventually, we're going to talk about a championship mindset. So, could you do me a favor, Scott, and just kind of break down this thought action habit cycle? Because I think this is very important for everyday people.
Well, first of all, I strongly believe that the direction of your life will go in the direction of your strongest thoughts. Whatever your strongest thoughts are, your life's going to go in that direction. And so your thoughts are super important. We have thousands and thousands of thoughts in our heads every day. Typically, 75% of our thoughts are negative. And typically, we have thoughts that repeat over and over in our head, right? When you repeat negative thoughts over and over your head, it's called rumination. And so often people get into a negative thought cycle and they can't get out of it. And so one thing that's a really big part of mindset training is being really intentional about having positive thoughts, using daily affirmations, planning out what you're going to think in different situations, because everything really happens twice in your life. It happens in your head first before it happens physically. And so everything that happens physically, generally it happens in your head first. And once you get yourself to think in a pattern over and over and over, then all of a sudden your actions start following, and your actions start following on a regular basis. Eventually that becomes habit. And so habits are really who we become, and all of those habits begin with a thought. And so I don't know if that's quite what you're looking for, but that's kind of how I think of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to really and I'll kind of grab the baton on this and kind of throw my own iteration. So knowing first off and having the awareness of how many thoughts we have in a day, and knowing that we have a negative bias, unfortunately, that is reoccurring. And in our prior conversation, you had mentioned that I believe 90% of all those thoughts are repetitive. And so if we have this negative repetitive thought pattern, that's going to lead us to either take more positive action or more negative action, or maybe kind of tuck away and hide more. And then after a while, you become building these habits that, oh, I'm not that type of person, or every time I do that, it doesn't really work out for me, or things that are truly not actually true, or maybe very, like, the evidence of it is very slim, versus controlling and harnessing those positive thoughts to get into more positive and energetic type of action, which then obviously leads to better habits. So if you have any other thoughts on that, I'd love you to share, but that's really what I wanted to spend some time on, because I don't think a lot of people even know how many thoughts they have, let alone them being reoccurring. But then furthermore, how that leads to their body language, their action, which eventually becomes how they just respond to certain situations.
Yeah, and the number that I've seen most when I've done research is 60,000 thoughts a day. That an average person has 60,000 thoughts a day, which is amazing. And you might think, how could that possibly be true? But the reason it's true is your subconscious mind can process information so much quicker than your conscious mind. So we are unconsciously processing thoughts at a lightning speed all the time. And being able to control what we're thinking is a skill. I want to make sure I really emphasize that. This is not something that's just a God-given ability. It's a skill that you can develop, being intentional about changing your thoughts, stopping the negative thought process, and redirecting them into positive thoughts, right? Reframing, we call it cognitive reframing. Being able to do that is a skill that you can learn with practice. And again, that's part of what I do as a mindset coach, is help people learn to reframe their thoughts, to use positive self-talk, to use empowering talk, visualization, deep breathing, lots of different techniques we use to help people kind of reframe their thoughts, reframe their habits, reframe their emotions.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. And to know that there are practices out there that are very impactful, that says, maybe to take a couple deep breaths, or to be able to just kind of pause and say, hey, these last couple thoughts are not serving me very well. There's a book I'm reading right now called Emotional Agility, and it talks about in the first chapter that a lot of people don't know that we are both the thinker of our thoughts, but also the thinker itself. And so when it comes to these thoughts coming in, the analogy she used that I love so much is like waves coming into a beach, right? So our thoughts are like waves coming into a beach. They're always coming in. It's incessant. They're coming in. And her metaphor is we have to learn to surf the thoughts that serve us. And I've never really heard it put that way before. And the way she describes it, I think, is quite beautiful. But that's exactly it, right? We have this incessant kind of thing. And, it just, for some reason, if we don't kind of figure out that negative thought pattern, we believe, again, all these kind of negative things, unfortunately.
Yeah, and there's tools that you can learn. Like I said, and I'll mention a couple of them. I know one video I use a lot is there's a video put out by George Kittle, who was an Iowa Hawkeye football player in the day, now plays tight end for the 49ers, where he talks about something called a reset button. And he used to tape up his wrist, put a red dot on that wrist tape. And when he would have a bad play, in between plays, he would slap that button and he would tell himself next play. And so it's this idea of resetting his mind and focusing in on the next thing, not thinking about something you can't control, right? The last play, focusing in one play at a time. And so think about that. Think of all the times during your day where you might need to reset your mind, where you get distracted. Maybe it's something emotional. Maybe it's a conflict with somebody at work. Being able to reset your mind, a physical gesture, and then something you say in your head. That's a skill that you can learn to do. Another technique I just picked up. There's a researcher out of the University of Michigan named Ethan Kross. Just wrote a book called Shift, and it's about managing your emotions. Actually, the subtitle is Managing Your Emotions So That They Don't Manage You. And an example that he uses, he calls it distance self-talk. And what he tells you to do is when you talk to yourself, use the word you and use your name. So for example, I might tell myself, Scott, be positive. You got this, right? So I'm going to use the word you and I'm going to use Scott as if I was outside telling myself something. And it's distance self-talk. And they found through research that it's actually much more effective. And you think about it, are most of us better at listening, giving advice to ourselves or giving advice to somebody else? We're much better at giving advice to somebody else. And so when we can act like we're somebody else, giving ourselves advice, that distance self-talk, using our name and using the word you instead of the word I, is actually more effective. So that's a simple example of something that I would teach as part of our mindset training.
Yeah, that's absolutely gold right there, and that actually made a better example of what I was trying to mention about the thinker of your thoughts and also the thoughts themselves. That's wonderful, and this is extremely real too. So if you're an everyday person, you're listening to this, and you're kind of this is new to you. I just want you to take some time to really kind of process what we're talking about here in the sense of being curious and maybe try this out. Maybe it's a certain area of your work, of your relationship, of hobbies that you're associated with, and just try to see if you can experiment with this a little bit, because as we'll get into a little bit in the later part of the podcast, it can truly be influential with how you perform, because a lot of times people are wanting to get a certain outcome, and positive self-talk and affirmations can really get you to that point. So any other pieces here on this, Scott, before we get into our next piece of the podcast?
Well, I thought I might talk a little bit about nervousness versus excitement. That's another big area that we work with our clients on, because the physical stimulus you feel when you're nervous is exactly the same thing that you feel when you're excited. It's really all about how do you interpret those things. So when you get butterflies, when your heart starts racing, when your hands get cold and clammy, these are the exact same things that happen whether you're nervous or whether you're excited. So at that point, when you start feeling those, it's really about self-talk and visualization. What are you going to say to yourself when you start feeling those butterflies? And for example, what I like to just tell myself is, hey, this is going to be fun. This is exciting. For some reason, there's a big event coming up in my life that's making my stomach feel that way, right? There's adrenaline coming into my system. There's cortisol, stress hormone coming into my body. And so, for example, when I do public speaking, when I wake up that morning, I'm going to start telling myself how fun it's going to be. From the moment I wake up until I step onto that stage, I'm telling myself how fun this is going to be, how exciting this is going to be, how much I'm going to enjoy this experience. And then before I walk on, one of the things I always tell myself is, I'm going to crush this thing. I'm going to crush this. This is going to be the greatest talk I've ever given. And the third thing I tell myself is surrender the outcome. And surrender the outcome means Don't worry about the outcome. Don't worry about what the crowd thinks of you. Get up there, do what you've practiced, let your brain and body perform in the way that you've practiced. Let go of any anxiety, let go of the nervousness, and just perform.
Yeah, that right there, folks, is a formula that you need to take into anything that you want to succeed with in life. Because I think, in the grand scheme of things, if we really get a 50,000 foot view of life, how many times within our lives are we able to win in the moments that we want to win that matter to us, right? So, the more often we can practice these types of things for those big moments, the more we're going to take advantage of opportunities. And I just like to, like, you're kind of pumping me up just talking about that, but this shit really matters. It really matters to how your internal dialogue is. It matters how you view yourself. It matters how you speak to yourself. And so I think that is a wonderfully said piece. Um, so let's go into just a couple of quick hitters here for us. So we did talk about sports, or we did formerly talk about sports, but I'd like to talk about some principles within sports with you just real quick here. So as a mindset coach, you're obviously coaching athletes. And essentially what I want to lay out here is three kind of subcategories just to let you kind of speak on this a little bit. So the three things that maybe make up a formula that you work with them on, or that are just focus points, are performing under pressure is the first one. The second one is confidence. And then the third one is motivation. So just to kind of give that mic back over to you, let's go ahead and spend just a little bit of time on talking about performing under pressure. And feel free to add anything that you feel, is obviously relevant to this, or if there's anything in particular that y'all teach.
And we do separate all three of those as what we would consider three different mental muscles. And we a lot of times say strength training for the mind. It's just like if you went in the weight room and you were going to work on, you want to have stronger biceps, you have certain exercises you would do to strengthen your biceps. And we have the same thing. If you want to get better at performing under pressure, we have specific exercises, activities that we do with the athletes. Same thing for confidence, same thing for motivation. So the performing under pressure, I've already talked about one of them, and that's learning how to interpret your stimulus from your sympathetic nervous system, learning to interpret that as excitement, not nervousness. And I love to walk by a line of people getting ready to jump on a huge roller coaster. Look at their faces, because you're going to see a bunch of people with big smiles on their face. They are excited, but about every, fourth or fifth person, maybe every sixth, seventh person, there's somebody that looks scared to death. And they're all getting on the same roller coaster. They're all getting on the same experience. It's all about how you interpret it. And so that's a big part of performing under pressure. And of course, we also have we call it a pre-match routine or a pre-competition routine, where no matter what you're doing, you have a routine that you do. So for example, in wrestling, you may have specific stretches that you do, specific warm-up routine. You have specific time when you're going to take off your warm-ups. You have specific things you're going to say to yourself in your head before you step on the mat. You might have specific things you're going to visualize before you step on the mat. So we create a routine, and we always say that the biggest event is just the next event. We're not going to make any event special. Every event is important. We're going to go out and try to perform at our best. We're not going to worry about winning or losing. We're not going to worry about anybody else. We're not worried about what our mom or dad or our coaches or our friends, we're not worried about what they think about. We're totally focused on ourselves and just getting out there and letting it fly, relaxing, performing free, and letting our brain and body do what we've trained it to do.
Absolutely. And just as a gentleman that was a former athlete, one thing that really stuck out to me that I maybe wish I would have implemented a touch more, and you had already mentioned it, but I'll kind of say it again, is obviously relaxing and just enjoying the moment and understanding that you've been there before, and that's kind of the next step, right? Number two is surrendering that outcome. And I bring that back up because so often we put way too much pressure on ourselves. I'm guilty of it as the next person, and we try to do way too much. And to your earlier point of this is just the next step, that's really all it is, right? And I'm sure in the wrestling world, you got the early season practices in the high school gym to wrestling in Des Moines. It's the same exact length of circle. It's the same exact competition, but it's just that this one has a shit ton more people and a lot of noise, and the other one does not. So the process is what it is. But I think people can really, hopefully associate with that, and maybe talking a little bit into real life here, that is the same thing for a business meeting, or that's the same thing with getting, trying to work hard at your job or at a hobby. It's the process of you coming in and doing it repetitively that truly makes the difference there. So I obviously loved what you had to say. Is there anything else on that before we move to confidence?
No, I think you're hitting it on the head, though. We want to get a routine where we act the same way if it's a match, say a wrestling match that doesn't mean a lot to the state tournament, or if it's closing a $200 business deal or a $2 million deal. We want to have a routine that we go through and perform the same way no matter what. That's consistency compounds.
Absolutely, absolutely. Beautiful. So now moving to the second ingredient, which is confidence, and this one I really, really love because this to me is all about that internal dialogue and how you treat yourself. And I know body language makes a entrance here, but how would you speak on how you're coaching about building confidence?
Well, first of all, confidence, there's no substitute for hard work and putting in the reps, right? Whatever you're trying to get better at, if I'm trying to get better at public speaking, the more times that I've actually practiced my talk, the better I'm going to be, the more confident I'm going to be. So I have to start with that. But I think everybody knows that, right? If we practice a lot, we're going to be more confident. But then it comes into self-talk, like you're talking about. What are you telling yourself before you step into that job interview, before you step onto that stage, before you step onto that athletic field? And telling yourself the right things. Like myself, telling myself I'm going to crush it over and over and over. It helps me a ton. Visualizing. I've seen studies where they tell someone to raise their right hand and they look to see which part of the brain is activated. Then I tell them, okay, think about raising your right hand. Guess what? The same part of the brain is activated. And so not only do you want to get, let's say you're a baseball pitcher and you're throwing your curveball, you might go out and throw 20 pitches, then go home that night and visualize yourself throwing another 20. You don't get any wear and tear on the arm. Actually, we call these shadow bullpens, where you're shadow bullpens. A lot of people will even go on the mound and do them on the mound, but they're not actually throwing the ball. So they'll do their pre-pitch routine, whatever that might be, which might involve, somehow wiping the rubber with their foot. It might be visualizing something. It might be taking a deep breath. They won't actually throw the ball, but they're going to close their eyes and visualize it. And so we call these bonus reps because your brain's developing the muscle memory without actually getting the wear and tear on the body. And so we try to combine actual physical reps with mental reps. Doing those two things together can really develop a lot of confidence. Another technique one of the lessons that we do with Z Winning Mindset is we'll have the athletes write down all the things in their sport that they've achieved. Then we'll have them write down all the things that they've achieved physically. Maybe it's squatted a certain amount of weight. Maybe it's running a mile in 6 minutes, the physical things. Then we'll have them write down all the things they've achieved outside of sports, in school, in life. Then we'll go back to their sport again and say, okay, what are your strengths within the sport? All right, what are your strengths physically? What are your strengths outside of the weight room and outside? And so we're getting them just to think about the good things, their strengths, for a long time. Because what I said earlier is that your life will always go in the direction of your strongest thoughts. And so if we can get people to think about their strengths and think about them on a regular basis, on a daily basis, they're going to be more confident and they're going to continue to develop those skills.
No doubt. Very, very well said again. That might be the highlight of my or my statement of the podcast for me is going to be that's a great thought process or good quality stuff right there. But it definitely deserves it. The two things that I'll add into that I appreciate not only from what I've learned and what I coach now to also just what I enjoyed as an athlete. One was from a wonderful book called Atomic Habits, and it's an excerpt from James Clear, and he basically says how you develop confidence is you stack up an undeniable proof of evidence that you've said and you've done what you've said that you're going to do. So when you go into a public speaking speech or let's say you're officiating a wedding or going into a business meeting or going into a test, you've been there and you have this undeniable pile of evidence saying that you've done this successfully. So this is no different. You've been here many, many times. Um, and then the second thing is obviously going back a little bit to how you're speaking to yourself. And for me, it's just telling myself, I want to be here. I want to be in this moment. I'm deserving of this moment. Another example with that is Aaron Darnold in the Super Bowl before he went out for his last defensive, performance to end up winning the game. He told himself essentially, this is why I'm this guy. Like, this is why I'm the man. It's this right here that I perform at my best. And so I really do think if you can repetitively just give that to your subconscious, and to your earlier point of telling yourself you're excited and wanting to be there, I just think that most of the time it's probably going to work out for you.
Yeah, and if you want to see some good self talk, Google Aaron Donald self talk. I've got the clip, and yeah, he's the master of self talk, and there's no wonder he was in the Pro Bowl so many times. You did make me think of a quick story I want to tell, and because you mentioned officiating wedding, I've officiated a couple weddings, and 2 or 3 years ago, my niece asked me to officiate her wedding, and it was in the winter, and it happened to be on the day of our home wrestling tournament at West Delaware. And of course, I'm not going to turn down my niece. So I talked to Coach Voss, the head coach, and said, hey, would you mind if I miss the second half of the tournament? My niece wants me to officiate her wedding, and it's about an hour and a half drive. Well, unfortunately, I got sick on, I think it was Thursday, and we had a dual meet that night. And of course, I went anyway. I screamed and yelled, completely lost my voice. Went to school on Friday. I had to teach one class. I taught an entire statistics class without saying a single word. The students were awesome. Like, they did everything. I would just write the directions on the board. They did exactly what I wanted to do. I did not say a single word for 90 minutes, and I taught a complete statistics class. Went to the meet on Saturday morning, coached all morning without trying not to say a word. I could barely talk anyway. I had laryngitis. I could barely talk. So I'm trying to get my voice back to where I could do the wedding. It's that afternoon. Go to the wedding, try not to talk. Wasn't sure if I even could. I walk in. My nephew, the bride's brother, first thing he said to me is, I bet you're nervous. You got to officiate the wedding. I bet you're nervous. He doesn't even know that I can't talk. And so it was a great challenge for me to have the self-talk, the confidence I needed to step up and officiate my first wedding in front of hundreds of people when I hadn't been able to talk for a day and a half. And again, I just told myself, I'm going to crush this thing. Actually, I used that my nephew's comment to me as motivation. It kind of made me mad. It ticked me off. I'm like, no, I'm going to crush this thing. I don't care if you think I'm nervous or not. I'm going to crush this thing. And sure enough, it went super well. It actually, there's a clip in there that it's kind of a funny clip where I tried to trick her husband to be. That actually went viral. I think we got, 500,000 likes on TikTok or something like that. So yeah, so it was, again, the biggest moments. If you've practiced the self-talk, if you've practiced the techniques, they're going to be there when you need them. And that was an exact situation where I needed all the skills that I've been teaching my athletes.
Yeah, and that's exactly it right there. And I'm glad you brought up a real world example, because sometimes I think people hear this conversation and they go, yeah, I wish I could have used that when I was an athlete, or, that only applies to sports. And it couldn't be further from the truth. Self-talk is what can really make or break your long-term success in life. And whether that sounds dramatic or not, I mean, this is a perfect case in point for you to describe that. So for me, I have this golden retriever energy to me, and I'm always just super like redlining on energy. So for me, I have to do the complete opposite when I go do stuff like that. So I literally am pacing around. I'm so pumped up. I have to, like, my cue is get comfortable as quickly as you can. And so that's what I use, is whether it's, the first line of the opening statement of this, or in a, I know like intramurals, people display that now, but like, I always try to tell people, get as comfortable as quickly as you can, because when you're comfortable, you're relaxed and you're able to perform. So find a way to get as comfortable as you can, as quick as you can, and generally your body will take over. But phenomenal story there. I didn't realize that it got so many TikTok views though, but that's a great testimony right there. Real quick question. Did you have a chance to do your second wedding in terms of officiating, or is that still the one and done that you've?
Yeah. It was a fun It ended up being a fun event, even though it was challenging.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it. What a memorable first time though. That's hard to beat.
It's not something I'm asking people to call me about doing. It's not something my wife kind of volunteered me for the second one. And I enjoyed doing it. A good friend of ours in Manchester, but uh, so please don't call asking me to officiate. If you need mindset coaching, if you need any type of coaching, leadership coaching, be happy to help you, but I'm probably not going to officiate a lot more weddings.
Beautiful. So let's go ahead and get to this very third point here on motivation. So just as a quick recap, we had performing under pressure, confidence, and then motivation. So Scott, if there's anything specifically that comes to mind with motivation, feel free to take the ball and run with it a little bit.
I think, you actually started the podcast with asking me my why. And I think your motivations, it starts with your why. What gets you out of bed in the morning? Why are you on this earth? Why are you doing what you're doing? Whether it's a job, whether it's a sport, you've got to know your purpose. And when you know your purpose, it's easy to get out of bed in the morning. Beyond that, one thing we work on a lot with our athletes is motivation. We call them motivation buttons. And of course, everybody's been in school and seen how, and you've seen people push a teacher's buttons, right? Or especially if you have a substitute teacher, right? The students know how to push the substitute teacher's buttons. And so the question is, do you know how to push your own buttons though? And so there's certain things that you can learn to do to motivate yourself on a daily basis. And motivation is something you have to redo every day, right? It's not something I'm going to get motivated. Okay, I'm good for the next month. No, you have to motivate yourself every single day. And it does come from self-talk. Other ways we motivate, music is a big one. I mentioned Ethan Cross's research from University of Michigan. He talks about music being able to shift your mood. And music, you should have a playlist on your phone that calms you down. You should have another playlist that gets you pumped up. You should have playlists that you can click on to change your emotion, to change your mood, to motivate you when you need it. That's a very simple one. Other things could be pictures. Maybe a picture of a lion helps you feel aggressive and motivated. You should have that pictured in your locker if you're an athlete, right? If you need something to calm you down, you mentioned that you've got high energy. Maybe your picture is the ocean, the beach. Maybe that makes you feel calm. So using all of your senses is important. Our senses are great ways to impact our emotions and our motivations. So posting pictures, having music, even daily affirmations, recording daily affirmations and listening to them throughout the day is another thing you can do. Knowing the people that motivate you. I bet you could name somebody right now that if you call them, when you get off the phone, you'd be more motivated than when you call them. And so knowing the people that motivate you, those are motivation buttons. So learning what your buttons are and what motivates you, because it's all personal, is super important in your life. And so,
and I would, if you don't mind, I'll take that baton and run with it a little bit. And I want to talk specifically about after sports, because in sports, it's pretty straightforward. You want to win, or you want to win a championship or win a match. So that's like not too, it's black and white in that sense. But I would encourage anyone listening to this that taking this podcast and the tools in this podcast and figuring out what you want, whatever it is that you want to do, and applying this to that, and then having that motivation to wanting to go after something that you want. And hopefully this want is big enough that, you get a little uncomfortable, and it's something that's really gets you, fired up, because that's how life is supposed to be. We're supposed to be purpose-driven people. And so I would definitely encourage you to try that as just an experiment, to just say, what is it that I really want to do? What would be super fun for me? Or really, I can get really excited about. And then obviously using all these other ingredients to go after it would be a good way to actually take the tactical stuff from this podcast and go apply. Wonderful stuff here. Any concluding things before we get to a really nice kind of, not concluding point, but there's one more major thing I want to hammer out on this podcast.
Well, the question that I thought of, I'm actually working with an insurance company right now. It's a personal growth stuff that I'm doing with a team out of Des Moines. And one of the questions I asked him the other day, if you could do anything and you knew you would not fail, what would you do? Mm-hmm. If you knew you wouldn't fail, what would you do? Because most of us let fear hold us back.
100%.
And so think about your passions, think if you could do anything in your life and you knew you wouldn't fail, what would you do? It's a great question that I think our listeners could ask themselves.
Yeah, and write that down. Write that down on some piece of paper, and then don't back down from it. Once you have it on piece of paper and you're able to get in that visualization, use that to your advantage. But I love it. I love it. So we're gonna switch slightly here, and I want to talk about something a little different, but all these things really do apply because we've been talking at the individual level, but you were a part of something that I think is quite rare in the sense of a team accomplishment or a dynasty, so to speak, in sports. And I love sports myself, but I also think it's a wonderful analogy for many things in life. And so you were a part of a championship program at West Delaware Wrestling where you guys, I think, had either won 3 or 4 championships in a row. And there's this kind of people that do that do things differently than people that don't have success. Again, everyone wants to win, but there's certain people that do different processes, different systems, and that's what leads them to be successful. So if you wouldn't mind, I know we talked beforehand and last time about the story between you and Coach Jeff Voss at West Delaware about how you had won it in 2019 and then just kind of how he led you through that process and that lesson that he taught you during that time.
Yeah, and just to give a quick backdrop on this, so Coach Voss and I were there early 90s. We started coaching there, and for 25 years we never really had a losing season. We were always pretty good. But we did seem to be able to consist. We won a few state championships, but we weren't able to do it back to back to back. Right? We'd have a real good season, and maybe wouldn't be so good. And then 2016, 17, no, 15, 16, 17, we actually had losing records for the first time 3 years in a row. We'd won 25 years without having a losing record. And then we had a losing record in 15, another one in 16, another one in 17. And I think those 3 years were the biggest blessing that we could have ever had, because I think it really forced us to rethink. And Coach Voss, I have to give him most of the credit for this, but it really forced us to rethink what we were doing and how we were doing things. And it's pretty easy to get people on board with change when you're not having success. So, I was fine with changing some things. And one of the things he started doing, he started talking to our athletes. He started interviewing our athletes after every season and saying, hey, what worked for you this year? What didn't work? And then he started making changes on some of these things are built around our culture. Some of these are things on how we trained. A lot of culture stuff he was doing. And 2018, one of my most memorable seasons, we actually finished third in the state tournament. After losing 3 years in a row, we finished third. 19, we win the state tournament. So coming back into 20, I'm thinking, okay, we've got the magic recipe. We've got this figured out, right? We don't need to change anything now. Let's just keep it like it is. And working with some great coaches like Chris Lenz and Mitch Payton, Jeff Voss, and we would meet before the season, and Coach Voss would say, yeah, I think we should try changing this, this, and this, and everybody's throwing out ideas. And I'm thinking, gosh, do we really want to change? But we do make a bunch of changes because we trust Coach Voss. He has good reasoning. 2020, we win the state tournament again. I'm thinking, well, surely now we won't change. Nope. Going into 21, Coach Voss is like, hey, got some more changes. Let's tweak this. Let's tweak that. I'm thinking, you got to be kidding me. And I supported him, but in my head, I really wasn't totally on board with all these changes. And 21, we actually had our best season ever. Had, I think, 11 kids qualify for state. All 11 came home with medals. I think we scored the 5th most team points in Iowa State history at the state tournament. And now I'm starting to figure it out. Coach Voss was not going to let an outcome, whether it's negative or positive, keep us from getting better. His focus was, how can we be better today than we were yesterday? How can we be better tomorrow than we are today? I have no idea how many times I heard him say that, but it was in the hundreds. We rarely talked about winning. We rarely talked about winning a state title, but we did talk about how can we get better? How can we get better by the end of the week? How can we get better by the end of practice? How can we get better in the next 10 minutes? That's where the focus was. And I give him a ton of credit. And I learned so much from coaching with him and the other coaches in the West Delaware wrestling program.
Yeah, I mean, what a great, and I should say, before, I didn't know that you had 3 losing seasons before this tide change. So that makes this story even sweeter. But I think that you have to really like unpack that and know that first off, it's extremely rare to have back to back to back. Obviously, that accomplishment is incredible, and kudos to everyone that put the work in for those seasons. But one thing that I just think is so cool about that story is this ability to iterate, and it's not getting complacent with what has worked, or in some ways still using what does work, but constantly iterating. And this is one formula that I want everyone to really listen to, because in life, like in sports, you have these parameters, right? You can only compete for a couple of years in high school. Maybe if you get the privilege to compete in college or even professionally, eventually in sports, you have your father time catches up with you and says, no, 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 we're done now. But in life, you have until the end. So this exact thing is so applicable to anyone that's looking to change the course of their life through doing these things. So if you've had success in the past, obviously honor that, but look to iterate, look to continue to be curious and how you can get better. And moreover, how to be process oriented. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's so easy, as you know, to really just sulk in that success. Hey, let's tip our caps, let's pop the champagne. This is great. But the real work begins in being able to, be consistent. And that's why I think that it was so worth, you being able to describe that. And if there's any other things, I have one more thing to talk on, but I'll turn it back over to you if you have any other thoughts on that.
Well, I mentioned we did win again in 22, so we won 4 years in a row. Now, Coach Voss's son's actually head coach, Jake Voss, and he's continued to iterate. I went back. I'm not coaching this year, but I went back to practice one morning. He's continuing to iterate. He's continued to make changes. They've now placed first or second 6 out of the last 7 years. So these are completely different kids than what we started being successful with. These aren't. I mean, we have great athletes. We have great fans. We have it's a wonderful atmosphere, but the system's working. And I think, again, that what you already said it is focus on the process, not the outcome. The process is so much more important than the outcome or the product.
Gosh, it's fantastic. And then let's wonderfully tie the first part of the podcast with this, in the sense that you had mentioned, thoughts to action, action to habits. Well, this is the beautiful part of it, right? It becomes a system. It becomes a process. Success becomes predictable through the reoccurring habits and the reoccurring processes. But the one thing that we haven't talked a little bit about is patience, right? So everyone, again, wants to win, but do you have the patience to say, hey, we're going to continue to put the work in every day, every week, every month, every year to get to that outcome? So like, we're doing all that stuff every single day, but then can you also have the overall patience to let that work for you instead of against you? So that's another element that I think, especially in my generation and the younger generations, we just don't have the patience because of how fast things move. To like, when you build something like this, that didn't just get built in a year. That got built over a 5 to 7 year period, and it's still ongoing. So can you just talk a little bit maybe about how patience works into also being able to like have the discipline to put in the work every day?
Well, you've talked about atomic habits, so I can't help but bring up the story that James Clear talks about the ice cube. And I don't know if I'll get it perfect because I haven't read the book for a little while, but we talk about with our wrestling team about this a lot. That if you put an ice cube in a room, let's say it's 26 degrees in the room, and you put an ice cube in the room and you go in there and you're going to watch it melt. And you turn the room up to 27, nothing happens. You turn the room up to 28, nothing happens. 29, nothing happens. 22 or 30, nothing happens. 31, nothing happens. All of a sudden, 32 degrees, 33 degrees, the ice cube starts to melt, right? And pretty soon that ice cube's gone. And so we like to say you got to melt the ice cube. If you're putting in the daily work, you have the habits and you're putting in the time and effort and you're doing the right things, you got to be patient and you're melting the ice cube. I think it's called the threshold of latent potential is the fancy word he uses in there. That there's this stored energy, right, in the work that you're putting in, but sometimes the results happen very quickly all of a sudden. And so you've got to be patient. Another analogy I use is when you're in your car, look at your rearview mirror versus your windshield, right? Your rearview mirror is very small. We should spend very little time looking behind us. We also call it the 95-5 rule. 5% of the time we look at what we've done, we learn from our past. 95% of our time is focused on the future. And just because you're not seeing the results now doesn't mean that you're not melting that ice cube.
Amen. Well, and to add on the evidence piece mentioned earlier, that's what stacks the evidence. Is like, think about in 2020 or 2021 when you're going for the three-peat, the body of evidence that you have to go out and win a championship, it's so plentiful. So then you're able to lean on that and say, hey, now that all this work has been put in, we can just make these tiny tweaks instead of making massive change tweaks to try to get there. So yeah, you gotta obviously put in the work, but just know that sometimes it just takes a while. Sometimes it takes a while to have that all build up, and then when it compounds, I mean, you gotta be a fan of a team in a dynasty that can win a four-peat, but you don't just get there because you do something fancy in 1 year. You really truly have to put the work in. So yeah, I mean, if you're listening to this and it seems like a lot, I mean, it may be, but this is the formula to, again, how to positively change your life, and to know that once the hard work of the inertia of taking off and building these systems and processes, all of that takes its footing in some way, shape, or form, and it makes you who you are. Um, and so, yeah, that's one thing I really wanted to address outside of the first part of the podcast, is just this example of how you can apply the long-term effect of thoughts to actions, actions to habits, and then eventually processes and systems that essentially guide you to success. So it's a beautiful thing. So one last thing that we wanted to talk a little bit about, and we felt this was important, is the ability to receive and give feedback, and then also to be able to leverage that feedback. So obviously, this is important for athletes to get better. But after you're kind of done describing how you leverage this, I think we should really kind of aim this towards young adults, or even adults of any age, because I think it's one of the ways to get to success faster if you do want to fast track it, but something that deters a lot of people too if they're not coachable. So when I'm talking about giving and receiving feedback, what kind of comes to mind? Obviously, I think in the past you might have referenced the wrestling room and that, but anyway, I'll turn it over to you for you to speak on it a little bit.
Well, I think first of all, there's a book called Thanks for the Feedback, where I learned a lot about feedback and then try to apply a lot of it. And one of the big things I learned from that book was that the most important part of the feedback loop is the receiver. Receiving feedback is the most difficult piece for people. Anybody can give feedback, right? Anybody can go tell people their opinion, but how well do you receive feedback, especially feedback that you don't agree with? Can you find a nugget of truth that you can grow from, even when most of the feedback is something you disagree with? And the other thing is, especially, I'll say this for leaders, as you grow, as you get higher up in an organization, it's really hard to get honest feedback from people. When you're the boss, especially, it's hard to get honest feedback, or from your friends. It might be hard to get honest feedback from your friend. So you've got to embrace the messenger. And this comes from a book called The Culture Code. He talks a lot about the greatest cultures in the world and how they embrace the messenger. If Nick, if you came up and said, "Hey, can I give you some feedback, Scott? I really think you need to do this, and this differently," and I say, "Nope, you don't have a clue, Nick. You don't have a clue. Are you going to come back to me and give me feedback next time? No, you're never coming back to me." I've got to embrace the messenger. I've got to say, "Man, Nick, I'm so glad that you came and told me this. I really appreciate the fact that you're willing to give me that feedback. I'm going to use this and try to grow from this." Embrace the messenger. That's probably one of the biggest pieces of advice I would have. We really saw this in the wrestling room. And again, this is one of the things that Coach Voss really embraced, was we expected every kid to give and receive feedback to their workout partner. We went from having maybe 8 or 9 coaches in the room to having 50 coaches in the room, because every athlete was expected to give feedback. Every athlete was expected to receive feedback. I know Brett Mather, who's had a great run as a volleyball coach at West Delaware. He does this with his volleyball girls. I don't care if it's a senior working out with a freshman. That senior's got to be willing to take feedback from that freshman. And when you can make that part of your culture, that's like an explosion of growth, because all of a sudden everybody's learning and growing on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's really good stuff, in the sense of a tool or tactic that I think a lot of times we I guess what I wanted to add earlier, and again, thank you for adding that in, is when you're receiving the feedback, one thing I would highly encourage, and I've done this in my own life and I feel like it helps, is tell yourself before you're going in there, or even in the moment, say, "Hey, let's just be open to this," right? Let's be open to what's being said. So you're kind of emotionally preparing yourself, because especially with men, getting feedback can be hard to our ego, right? We think we got something figured out, especially if we're really good, right? We're like, I don't know. I don't know. That immediately will come up. But if you can just pause a moment and say, all right, I'm open to this, and wanting to take it in, I think you can get more information because, again, these are people that are outside of you. They see you in a different perspective than you see yourself. So if you just dismiss it, you might have missed a very piece of valuable information that someone from the outside world is trying to give you to get better. And obviously in the wrestling room, that's constructive, right? I mean, obviously it gets a little competitive and it's intense, but at the same time, it's very highly constructive because that's a real time thing. But even in the real world, whether it's a manager or a coworker you don't like, and I love how you bring up something that, it's not favorable to hear certain feedback. Those are oftentimes interesting messages that if you just get your ego out of the way and process what they're sharing, then you can decide, hey, is this true or not? Because if it's true, let's pay attention to this. If it's not, then fair enough. But I think that's a way for people, if they struggle with that, to really kind of open themselves up and just be like, hey, let's just take a little bit of time. This isn't personal. Let's receive what's being said. Is this true or not? If it's true, well, let's take some time to process that. And let's try to get, like you said, grow or get better off of it.
I love that you're using self-talk to prepare yourself for the feedback, Nick. It all fits together, right? All these things we're talking about fit together. And so I agree 100%. If you go in with the right mindset, you go in trying to learn and looking for that nugget of truth, even when you don't agree with the feedback, looking to learn, you're going to come out with a chance to grow from that experience.
Yeah, and I'll give one more example, and this will go a little bit into my marriage and my relationship. That is one thing that I've used or try to be incredibly good at is whenever we're in a tense moment, or if she's trying to give me feedback. I mean, generally speaking, there's a lot of those stereotypes out there where you think they're nagging you or they're just trying to ride you. But if you can just take a moment to pause and again just be like, okay, is this true? And is the motivation coming from they're trying to make a threat or they're trying to better, me, whatever it is, like when you just kind of honor where the intention is and if this person cares about you. And it's kind of hard to hear sometimes, well, you got to be a grown up and say, this might actually be true. And she's coming from a great place and wanting to have the best for me. Or in the wrestling room, that's my teammate, right? They want to win. I want to win. We're part of the same team. They care about me. That's why they're saying this stuff. So yeah, I like spending time a little bit on feedback because that is a way I think that you can put the building blocks in to speed up success. Because think about this, if you get 10 pieces of feedback and your ego's in the way and you dismiss all 10, you might have just missed out on 3 nuggets of information that could have expedited your mental or emotional growth. So that's why you're not going to just accept everything. Obviously, you got to be a little mindful of who's giving it and what they're saying, but you can really make good progress if you're just allowing yourself space to be able to understand what's coming in at you.
Yeah, and I think good point that, whether it's feedback or any of these other things we're talking about, they're so useful when we're trying to develop and maintain relationships, whether it's with a spouse, whether it's with your kids, your parent, or a friend, or a coworker. Mindset has a big impact on your relationships and how you relate to other people.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I'm not perfect at, but it certainly helps me instead of just assuming that they're out to get me or riding me or whatever. So yeah, hopefully y'all can find a little bit of help with that too. All right, so this has been honestly, one of the more fun podcasts that I've done, and I say that because I love this topic of conversation. I love building championships. I love talking about mindset. I think it's so applicable in many ways. But there was one more thing I wanted you to add in terms of kind of how you track or an app or anything that you use that kind of helps you stay focused on some of this stuff. So feel free to talk on that a little bit.
Yeah, and I didn't really talk about goal setting with the wrestling team, but I really model my goal setting of what we do with the wrestling team. And we start with a long-term vision, something I would call a telescope goal. And then we drill it down to what I would call microscope goals. So daily goals, daily habits that I'm trying to do every day that are going to help me take a step towards my goals. The app that I found really helpful is called Habit Share. I'm sure you can download it on your phone. And what it allows you to do is put in your habits. So I pull up my phone. I've got a habit of I'm going to eat vegetables every day. I've got another habit I'm going to exercise every day. I've got another habit I'm going to practice my public speaking every day. And I can go in there and mark the habits, mark each day whether I did or didn't do that habit. But the power is in the social aspect of it, because I have my own personal coach down in Texas. And guess who gets to see every day whether I've done my habits or not? I do the exact same thing with my clients. I can see their habits. I can see when they've done them, when they haven't done them. And they haven't done them, I can keep them accountable. So if you're looking for an app, and maybe that's going to maybe do it with a friend, do it with a coach, do it with somebody that you can keep, that keeps you accountable. Habit Share is a good one that's worked for me.
I love it. I love it. So we're wrapping up here. If someone wants to get coached by you, or wants to maybe invest in help coaching others, if you wouldn't mind plugging your information for both the Z Winning and also the John Maxwell coaching as well too, so people can hear that.
Yeah, the Z Winning Mindset. The wrestling division is called Wrestling Mindset. Basketball is Basketball Mindset, etc. You can go to zwinningmindset.com. If you're into wrestling, you can go to wrestlingmindset.com to see everything that we offer there. We do team coaching as well as individual coaching. I'm actually getting ready to run a coaching certification where I'm going to train coaches coming up next week. If you're interested in that, let me know. It can be coaches from any sport. And then as far as my business, my own business through the Maxwell organization, my cell phone number, you can just call me on my cell, 563-608-9464. Booking right now to speak. I'm speaking in schools, to businesses, scheduling right now, as well as training and personal coaching also.
I love it. And I think that the concluding point I want to make with coaching, and I know we hinted at a little bit earlier of, why do we stop getting coached at a certain point? This is a great opportunity to have someone that is an accountability partner. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, man, I'm fired up right now, but I don't know if I have anyone in particular, it might be worth investing a little bit of money in getting a coach. Because again, they're going to be coming from a good place of love, and they're going to try to help you get better. And generally speaking, people in coaching industry as a whole, they just want to push you to the best version of yourself. So the intentions are generally pure, but I appreciate you sharing all that. And then finally, Scott, thank you so much for coming on the Life with Nick podcast. Had a blast talking with you. And thank you for your patience as well too. I know we had some technical errors, but I have full faith that this will turn out very, very well. And I hope the listeners enjoy. So any other things you want to mention before we get wrapped up?
It's been a pleasure being here, Nick. Glad to thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, this has been awesome. And until next time, guys and girls.